fantastic. I apologize, there's huge noise where I am. I'm in between spaces in the world, but I'm happy to be here and connected to the gods of the tribe. I just wanted to say thank you, Rael, for really making time for this, for us to collaborate on projects. As Rael said, I am one of the co-founders of the Africa Arts and Venice Forum, which takes place during the opening week of the Venice Biennale. And me and my colleagues brought it together because there's a lot of African pavilions and conversations and things that happen, but not really a meeting place like a home for dialogue, conversation, and network. So today we have some artists who did exhibit and as well attended some of our talks. And then as well, we have a wonderful curator as well who is doing some amazing work and who was there to be present during the opening week. I'm the type of person I like to have people speak about themselves and have their own voices. So we have with us today, my God, good morning. Sifu and Godwana, and then we also have Ronald Muchatuta, right? Did I say it correct? Ronald, I love it when I'm butchering your name. And then we have Paul Nditi, who's in Kenya. He should be joining us as well. He was here a few minutes ago. It might be a network thing, but I think Sifu, go ahead and please tell us, of course, give us your name, your background, and as well as background, of course, in terms of curatorial practice, and then as well the reason why you were here during the opening week of the Venice Biennale.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me, Manuel. Where do I start? Okay, so I'm Sifu Mudana, based in Cape Town. I'm an associate director at Stevenson Gallery. So Stevenson Gallery, we've got a space in Cape Town, gallery in Joburg, and also more recently, we've opened a small space in Amsterdam. And so between these spaces, we show on a regular basis exhibitions by sets of the artists that we represent. But we also do group exhibitions and also smaller exhibitions, part of a program we call Stage, where we show young artists who aren't represented by galleries or major institutions as yet. So being associate director at the gallery, I work mostly in production because I started working as an intern, and that's sort of where my interest directed me. But I also curate exhibitions, primarily group exhibitions. And the most recent group exhibition that I co-created with my colleagues Nato Priya was called My Whole Body Changed into Something Else, which showed a combination of, I think, about just over 30-something artists all based around the world, South Africa, Zimbabwe, New Zealand, Afghanistan, Brazil, the United States, and also parts of Europe. So the reason why I was at the Venice Biennale was because Kosho Zavarera, who was one of the artists that we worked with, based in Zimbabwe, Harare, was part of the main exhibition in the Arts and Artists. So she worked primarily with painting, so she paints from her brain, so she makes these like sort of figurative but also somewhat abstract paintings. That, of course, I would say are beautiful, but also are very, very colorful. And also another reason was that 4 of the artists were part of this most recent group exhibition were at Venice. So 3 of them were showing within the main exhibition, but also some of the side projects. So one of them was Precious Okoyomon, who I think some of you would have seen the large installation with like wool dolls and like butterflies and soil and water and sound. So they were part of the group exhibition. And the other artist was Timike Musungu, South African artist, who's currently part of the Rijks Academy in Amsterdam. She also had a very, very beautiful interactive installation at the end of the Art Biennale, which is sort of like sound-based installation with theremins and incorporated sound from like Miriam Makeba's music, poetry, political poetry, protest speeches, and also some speeches by Sinyabanga. And the other artist was Aziz Hazara, who's the Afghanistan artist based in Berlin at the moment. They live between Kabul and Ghent, but they currently doing residency in Berlin. And they were part of a film exhibition that was sort of like part of the science project, which is also the recipient of the Future Generation Art Prize 2021. And then the other artist was Moni Lola, who's a Nigerian American artist currently living in Berlin, and she was facilitating a conversation between Sonia Boyce, Precious Obiomon, and the curator of the UK, or the British Pavilion, together with Hans Ulrich. And yeah, so it was mainly just to connect with the artists that I know, but also sort of like those new connections. I think was amazing because I met Azza there and I bumped into Rael, who used to be my professor. So it was quite a beautiful experience. Yeah, thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So I love that introduction. I'm going to ask Sipo if you could please put the artists' names in the chat so that we can share it with everyone. And just to let you know, I don't know whether load shedding is happening or what, but the sound was a little bit choppy on my side. I don't know if it might just be me. It might be load shedding here in America, but the sound was a little bit choppy. So if there's a way to clarify it, that'd be lovely. Thank you so much. And it's great to see you, by the way. Where's Ronald?
Yes, Ronald is there. I think he should put his video on if he wants. But Ronald, would love to hear about you as well in terms of like your background, your practice, and as well your you exhibiting at the Zimbabwe Pavilion this year.
Hi everybody, how are you doing?
Hello, hello, hello.
Am I clear? Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you, sir.
Okay, sure. Thank you for having me on this platform. I really appreciate it. So basically, I'm a Zimbabwean who's an artist who's also staying in South Africa, practicing as an artist in South Africa, Cape Town, for the past 15 years. My practice spans more than 15 years. I'm almost on my 20th year of producing and moving art, but I started quite young when I was 16, turning 17. So I went through a lot of phases, mentorship programs, and a lot of learning new mediums within the journey. So by coming to South Africa, it was much more a case of trying to expand on new terrain with regards to a career as an artist and trying to expand and see what possibilities I could have within a foreign country besides the place that I know.
Ronald, hello.
Yes.
I'm getting a lot of feedback from somewhere, and I'm trying to figure out where it's coming from. Give me 1 second. Ah, you're in a loud space. Okay. It's fine. We just didn't realize. I was just hearing a lot of stuff, so I went to check on it. Thank you, sir.
Is it still fine?
Yeah. If you could just project, that'd be lovely. Thank you.
Okay. So anyway, my participation in Venice has been based on my narrative in my work with regards to migration. The main focus of my work has been the issue of trying to expand on the narrative of post-contemporary Africa with regards to the issues that still affect us as Africans post-colonialism. So one of the main attributes of that is the issue of migration within regional consequence and also, I'd say, continental consequence as well. So my participation in Venice is much more an inward analysis towards the effects or the issues that we have seen or we're going through as Zimbabweans based on the current political climate and economical climate that we find ourselves in. But mainly trying to encourage the masses to engage in what a Zimbabwean gaze would look at, but not using reference towards the Zimbabweans themselves, but also external people who might have stayed, who might have an opinion about what really is going on.
Thank you so much. So let me, now that we've heard from two of our creatives, would you please, Aza Sati, would you please also introduce the African Art in Venice Forum to all of us?
Yes, definitely. Well, what we have, this year was our third edition, and what was really great about it, we were talking about like kind of cooperation within the African context. I hope you can hear me well. There's a lot of echo where I am.
It's okay.
All right. So this year was very much about cooperation in terms of different practitioners and creative spaces kind of working with each other. So we had a really diverse panel talking on this in terms of women collaborating with each other, also talking about like NFTs and the world of photography and NFTs, kind of working in that. And then we also talk about like restitution, especially with work from how Benin was able to get some of their work from France, from Quai de Branly. So there were really kind of about like 8 to 9 panels in this kind of 2 days. And yeah, so that was really great. So I think now what we're continuing is that we are growing our network and we're growing our collaboration with the people who are with us. So yeah, so what I would also like to talk about is as well how we are trying to create programs that are happening between the forums. So it's not always every 2 years that we have these kind of conversations, but like little kind of mini gatherings, not only online, but also within the continent. And there might be one happening in Bamako, Mali, in the next coming months. So definitely I'm gonna put out the link for our, of course, social media, for you to follow kind of our programming and our work. I also have our artist, Colin Deep, who's trying to log in and come. He will come at some point, but for me to kind of give you a kind of general idea about Colin Deep, he's a Kenyan artist, abstract artist, and he does a lot of kind of work with this kind of figure. So he really kind of questioning a lot of kind of presence and a figurative kind of presence in the Kenyan urban context. So it's Mr. Smokey, and Mr. Smokey has been involved for the past 7-8 years, and he's a great character that kind of he plays around with. And he was exhibiting at the European Union kind of center that is in Venice, and he had a huge opening, and he had 3 pieces there. I will make sure that Paul will be able to join us in a few. I get the gods of the internet from like SA to Nairobi to here where I am in Rome. They like to play with us little tricks. So we'll make sure that we win at the end of the day. But yeah, so I'm gonna give it over to you, Rael. I mean, I'm seeing some amazing, phenomenal faces. I can't believe like all of them got to spend a whole month in Venice. I guess all of us together were going to spend only 5-6 days, and we were mesmerized by kind of the city, but also the amazing work that is there. So I would love to actually kind of hear about the whole experience, and then as well in terms of what Rael, you talked about like how African art, contemporary African art has always been kind of in the peripheries, and how it's actually moving into the center, and it's just not African art, but African art in the diaspora, and specifically how this year there was a huge kind of presence in terms of Black female creators. And I think that's a very kind of great point to talk about it. I'll give the mic to you, Ryle.
Okay, thanks so much for that overview and for that introduction. Before jumping into the conversation, I want to acknowledge this wouldn't have happened if it weren't for collaboration with my good colleagues, Jenny Hirsch and Kerr Houston. I don't want to put them on the spot, but I did want to say hi, and I wanted to maybe give them a chance to say hi to the artists and tell us where are things within your conversation at the moment. I know you all do a deep dive into the history, but also a critical assessment of what's happening now. So are there things that have come up and things that you know, issues, ideas that you would want to share with us, or just, you know, say hi?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you fine, Jenny. Hi.
Okay, we're in a kind of bad situation sitting in a cafe. The students are all in their rooms because to Zoom, this was our best option. But anyway, thank you so much for organizing, Ryle. Thank you so much to everyone for being with us. This is a program that I've run since 2009. And so one of the pleasures for me personally is, of course, seeing the Biennale evolve. And this Biennale in particular, I think, has been very exciting for our students. Everyone is so excited, first of all, to travel and to be able to experience together in person so much good art this year, and to look at ways in which some of the themes that run through particular artists' works and themes of the Milk of Dreams in particular, and how it overlaps with different things throughout the city. So really, you know, just to introduce the program itself, we call it the history of the Biennale then and now. I kind of map out some of the early history of the Biennale from the late 19th century. And it's been exciting, I think, this year in particular, to look at ways in which so many artists have responded to and critiqued a lot of the problems set up by the Biennale from the get-go, with its long history growing out of the kind of World's Fair model steeped in colonialism, and to see the correction of that and the assertion of focus on different indigenous populations, as well as so many BIPOC artists here this year. So that's a little bit of an introduction. It's sort of like the Olympics of running, not just the Olympics of contemporary art, but we have a really busy program where we, you know, kind of mix together an intense study of what's at the Biennale with other things happening through the collateral events here, but also some trips in the area to places like Padova and so on and so forth. So that's a little bit of an introduction to what we do while we're here. I won't put Kerr on the spot, but Kerr is here also, who does an amazing job and has done this with me for the past, I guess, since 2013, so 9 years. But it's such a privilege when we can actually engage with curators and artists and people who run important initiatives to really kind of enhance and improve, I would say, the Biennale. So it's also exciting, you know, again, our students come for 1 month, but then we reflect back on, you know, the last 5 or 6 in the classroom, kind of look at changes and what have been the big themes and how things also relate to what's happening now in the world. Some of the things, for example, connected to Ukraine and things like that. So that's just a little sort of background on what we do.
That's fantastic.
And thank you again for being here with us, and thank you, Ryle, for organizing. It's great.
Yeah, and thank you so much. So let's talk. We're still waiting for Paul. I hope his internet works out. It seems to be a troubling internet day, but it happens. And I'm interested in these themes that Jenny, you talked about a few things. I heard you talk about you know, the World's Fair, you know, the historical elements of the Biennale. And when I heard that, I thought about Ronald saying how you started off responding to some of the themes of post-colonialism, migration, that sort of thing. And those are, you know, big high-level themes, but how do they show up? You know, if I'm walking around in Venice and I am looking at contemporary art, how do these things show up for us? Do they still show up, or do artists make a big deal out of them? I mean, how do we think about it? Ronald, I don't know. Can I ask you a question?
Oh, yeah. Just for housekeeping's sake, I just wanted to know if my sound is better.
Your sound is great, and Jenny Hirsch, my colleague Jenny, says that let's have the students respond. I didn't know that would be an option, but since everyone's here, and I know some of the students, I'm going to ask everyone to join this conversation. You know that I see a few people who have had class with me, and you know, maybe you didn't sign up for this one, but what are the themes that matter to you? So now I'm talking to all of the folks in the audience. We're going to have a group conversation. And please do use the chat as we're here as well.
I think I can jump in from, you know, me coming to Italy was like my first time. And there was an immediate reaction towards me being Black, you know, in Italy. Certain processes of like trying to, I would say, assimilate for a short period of time into, you know, a European space. But when I went to the Italian pavilion and they had a piece on, I think the artist or the art projected there was about these flashing lights in the dark space full of water. And when I went to that space, I got shivers because I completely understand what it was. The artists highlighted the issue of, you know, migration, like the idea that one has to move from one continent to another where there's, you know, in the middle of the sea and it's dark and people have to flash their lights to see where the land is, you know. And I quickly connected with it without even having to read anything. So I feel like there are certain things that, for me as a Black person, there are certain things that I found resonating with me and my practice without having to get so much explanation. You know, I could just feel what the artwork meant, you know, based on our geographical politics and where we come from and stuff like that. And also, I think one of the things I saw with my compatriots that I showed with at our Zimbabwean pavilion was the case of how most of our work is made from discarded material and stuff. And then having to go to other pavilions where everything is pristine, everything is shiny and bright colors and stuff. Whereas our work is more like, you know, recycled. So that was kind of like the response I had.
So the issue of migration is everywhere. I mean, I think part of it, is that we convene in this European location, right, or the location of Venice. But the issue of migration, I'm interested in. So, people, did you? What were your strong reactions? What were your, you know, in gut level reactions when you first arrived? Had you been to Venice before?
No, so this was my first experience of going to Venice, but also like Italy altogether. Is my sound okay?
Yes, it's actually much better. Thank you.
Sure. So I think that, I think what I took away from the experience is that firstly, like access, I think, you know, what it highlighted a lot, at least for me, was the idea of access and what does it mean to have access to, you know, privilege, right? Because I think it was for the very first time where I met almost everyone that I've ever communicated with over email, whether it was within the last 2 years during the pandemic or people that, you know, certain artists that I had maybe aspired to meet since, you know, varsity. or exhibitions of artists who are international and who I would not have otherwise gotten the chance to see in South Africa. So that was one thing. And I think when Ronald mentioned the Italian pavilion, I think it was also, I think, one of the most incredible pavilions that I saw. Incredible because of its scale, but also because of the relevance of the, I guess, conversations that the artist and the curator was having. But also I think it sort of made explicit what that level of access means, right? I think you can see that, you know, the Italian, whoever was sponsoring the pavilion really invested a lot of resources into it. And part of those resources are financial resources. So then again, also Ronald mentions the fact that, you know, there's the, you know, the artists who are coming from, you know, either Africa compared or, you know, within the same international stage as like European artists. But then there are certain sort of like tangible differences that you can see. And also part of those, just like that tangible difference is the lack of resources or the extensiveness of resources that are awarded to certain artists based, you know, on the geographies that they occupy. And I also thought that, I mean, I don't know if it was my own experience, but the service in Italy was quite bad. Just like if you go into a restaurant and you're just trying to have a coffee or a croissant, it's incredibly bad. I don't know if it was because, you know, I was usually within a group of like Black people, and, you know, Italy is not one to reconcile its history of racism publicly. But at the same time, I sort of asked myself why the hostility within the people who are servicing this incredibly historical, this incredibly celebrated event. So what is the relationship between this, like this epitome of like art success in relation to the people who are living and are servicing this exhibition? And you find that a lot of the people who are working or servicing these international artists, curators, you know, these patrons are people who aren't even living within, you know, Venice itself, or they're living mainly inland. So then you also get to understand those dynamics and what those dynamics sort of bring into the conversation around the biennial. I think Jenny mentioned earlier that, I can't remember what you mentioned, but it made me think of, sure, I think it was around colonialism and how, you know, the critique around the Venice Biennial was, you know, we know that it's sort of like a major colonial project or post-colonial project, a neo-colonial project. But it's also, at least for me, was important to sort of think of how these conversations just like keep on existing. Like, I think you've always spoken about coloniality or colonialism or post-colonialism, but it just never ends. And if you're looking at, for instance, now the amount of female visibility, Black female visibility within the biennial, but then you look at the larger global climax in terms of like the wars that are just erupting out of the blue, the wars that have existed, you know, before, you know, the war in Ukraine, like Afghanistan, Sudan, even South Africa with xenophobia and the increase in crime rates. And I sort of was struck by what does it mean to sort of like exist in this bubble of celebration or this bubble of success or this bubble of progressiveness when everything outside of the bubble of the Venice Biennial is basically a shit show. And also, you know, the mass shootings in America, and literally I can't think of any country that has a level of stability where you can think that human beings are actually safe to live here. So I think that was the thing that sort of struck me. It was also, I think, the first major exhibition, maybe the second major exhibition that I've been to, and the first one was the Documenta, which was between Kassel and Athens, and that was very, very politically charged because of the relationship between Germany and Greece. So it was a little bit more clear, and I think they were trying, at least, you know, verbally, to acknowledge those relations. So I think this one, yes, they were, you know, I think it's sort of, I don't know if I heard certainly, you know, the conversations around it's trying to sort of like repatriate, to sort of correct, you know, the history of exclusion, the history of erasure, you know, the history of like rape and plunder. But at the same time, I don't think I saw it in terms of the works that were exhibited or the conversations, the curatorial conversations that were happening. I think a lot of the work was beautiful, and I think a lot of it was the context was incredible. I think even the idea of like post-human, but also a relationship between human beings and technology, and the larger sort of like climate change and all those questions. But I think that I don't know if I felt like I was in a space where I could speak about, the relationship of this sort of event in relation to the larger global context. So I was thinking that, so what Jenny mentioned was like post-coloniality or post-colonialism. And I thought, so like, what does it mean to speak of like post-colonialism as we have been, and I certainly have myself, when we haven't necessarily seen a lot of repatriation. And I think when I was in a conversation with Aza maybe 2 days ago, yesterday actually, she was talking about how there was a major exhibition of like some of the sculptures that we returned to Benin. Sure, that's one level of healing that has to happen, but we also have to ask, why is that happening right now? What about this time? Or what about this time that's sort of like making all of these conversations and critique sort of like desirable? And why are they desirable to the institutions that are housing them? I think that was, I think I went off a tangent.
No, so you raised many issues there, and I'm going to turn back to our audience. I don't know, we are the audience, right? So we're just having conversation. I'm having a good time. I hope you're having a good time. I see Leah Lati. Hi, Leah. Please unmute and say things. We get to see you too. Welcome. Hi.
Yes. Hello, Rael.
Hi, Leah. Nice living room. Love the virtual living room.
See, so as you can tell, I've had the pleasure of meeting Leah before. So that's why when she turned the video on, she was like, "Oh, I know. He's gonna ask me to turn on the video. I know." Join the conversation.
Yeah, I think just talking about what we're talking about, and it's just, what we have seen so far in Venice. I can talk about what I've seen so far. I think just first and foremost, I think Sisifo, am I pronouncing your name right?
It's Po. So in my language, PH is Po and not for.
Okay, got it. Sorry.
So what language is that for those of us who don't know?
Xhosa, Zulu, either or, but I'm also neither, but it's complicated, but it's, Bantu, let's say Bantu.
I kind of wanted to kind of tie back to what you said earlier about your experience here in Venice, because I feel like even just myself being here as a Black person has just been very strange. I'm sure just any of us here that are Black people that have walked through Venice, there's a lot of people that just stare at you and not in a very welcoming or friendly way. And that has really started to affect me a little bit. 'Cause I just, I don't know, I already have I get irritated very easily. So just the fact that it's just been happening every single day that I've, gone to the mainland of Venice, San Marco, et cetera, blah, blah, blah. It's, it's irritating me. But besides that, I think art-wise in Venice, personally, I'm trying to seek out more Black art to see outside of the biennial, and there's not a lot that's around, unfortunately. I will say that the exhibition that Gallery Murdis had, which is a Black-owned gallery based in Baltimore, their exhibition, which is called the Afrofuturist Manifesto, Blackness Reimagined, that was at the Palazzo Bembo, was a very great exhibition. I loved it very much. And then also Kari Turner's first solo international exhibition, represented by his gallery, Ross Sutton Gallery, was also amazing as well. It's in the same building. And then even just a local gallery that I kind of found out about, ACA Projects, if that's familiar with anybody. They have their own show that they're doing, like African Identities. It's kind of like I think like a multi-part exhibition that they're doing throughout this year from like April to November. And they've kind of like broken it down into chapters of, I guess, all the artists that are part of this ongoing show. I think about each month or so, they're showcasing different artists that like a part of the roster, just like their work and whatnot. So I visited, I guess, chapter 2 and just recently chapter 3 yesterday. I lost my train of thought, so I'm gonna stop right there.
Oh, wait, so no, I don't think you did. You, because I was with you the whole time, and you were walking me through things that I may not have seen, right? So you talked about Matisse and some of the other exhibitions that were striking to you. But you started by talking about how spectacular you were and how everyone wanted to look at you. So I actually want to pause there, right? So that we don't just move past that too quickly. So I've had the privilege of walking around in my body in Venice. And I don't know if people look at me or not, but what is that thing? Can you say more about that thing of being spectacular? So everyone wants to see you.
Well, I think, with Tisipo, I think, if I'm like saying it correctly, I'm sorry. Yeah, was saying earlier is how, Italy as a country probably still hasn't reconciled with its own racist history that it may have as a country. And, considering the fact that there isn't a lot of Black people that do live in this country, though I've heard that they're more so closer to like the southern part of Italy, that they're there. But I just think in Venice specifically, I think even now I'm starting to learn, I guess like the history, slavery-wise, and probably was like racism specifically in terms of Venice is starting to come to light to me a little bit because, first of all, I have my own publication that focuses on Black photographers throughout the world in the arts. And for the first time, I got to meet one of the photographers that I interviewed who's based in Milan. I went to Milan this past weekend, and he was explaining to me, kind of more things about Italy's fascist history and how one of the churches that is actually here in Venice, I think has like a racist motif on one of the buildings. I have to ask him which one it is so I can see it. So I think, information like that puts more things into perspective for me in terms of being here and just how people that are like frequenting this place, whether they're tourists or just locals, is kind of tying into how they're treating me as a person. And it's just, it's just a very interesting experience in general, just to travel outside of America as a Black person and seeing how white people interact with you, whether it's direct or not.
Well, let me, on the point of being in Italy, let me go back to Asa Sati, who's part of the African Art in Venice Forum, and say, Asa, can I ask you, I don't know if your sound is all right, but can you just say something about the forum and how you all, I don't know how many of the organizers are there, but what it was that made it important to have this forum in Venice?
Yeah, 100%. Just to tell everybody, the first 2 editions, I wasn't physically present because of other work engagements. So it was also my first time coming to Venice for the 3rd edition. And so I was always been involved in the organization, but just not being actually physically there. It was my first time as well to be physically there. And yeah, I think I connect to a lot of what Leia, I believe, and Tisipo are feeling is that, you know, my colleagues are Italians, but they're Italians from all over. And, you know, again, it was really kind of for me just going for 5 days there and in and out. And it was at the Hotel Monaco. I mean, it was a great experience to start because I think the 2 days were really kind of centered in a space where the majority of people who came and to be part of like the audience for the forum were mostly of African descent and diaspora. But I think everyone else who was working in the ecosystem of contemporary African art, and most of them are either, you know, European or Westerners or Middle Eastern and such. And I think within the forum, what we're trying to create is definitely kind of a diversity, but also kind of a home where different like kind of conversations are happening in terms of like, you know, the imbalance of art collectors, where a lot of art collectors are not what we're trying to push for, you know, overall, which is middle class, Black people who are purchasers, and it's not that. And I think what is happening as well is that if you really think about when we talk to things like restitution and the idea of, you know, returning back art, but we're also now contemporary African art, which is a trend. We're also kind of selling, right, objects of value to non-Africans too, and it's kind of a conversation that was actually also happening in the corridors of the forum. There was also kind of the idea of access. I think a lot of the artists who could make it is those that can actually afford to come to Venice, right? To get visas as well to Italy. And that as well, that deals with kind of imbalance of wealth too. And that kind of like searching these opportunities also it just stays within one type of circle, and how to kind of expand that, how you can actually have other people, artists who have less means to be in that space. So there's also kind of a privilege, the idea of privilege there, as well language. Most of it, all of it is mostly like in English and French. So how about artists of kind of Lusophone or artists who actually speaking kind of local languages, right? It being either, you know, Maasai or just Zulu or such, right? So I think there's a lot of kind of the idea with us with the forum, how do you make it just so inclusive? Because our means are very kind of limited. We're all working pretty much pro bono. And it's, you know, we're always trying to question in terms of like who can be in that space and yeah. So the forum still has a lot of work to do kind of internally in terms of how can it be of service to the community that we want to work with.
So thank you for that. Ronald, are you still with us?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, I wanted to circle back to you on this point because we've been talking a lot about the conditions of being in that location, you know, coming from all over the world to the Art Olympics. I call it the Art Olympics, right? Coming from all over the world to go to the Art Olympics. And I always feel like super special when I get to see art with other people who are like fancy art people. So, but then I want to hear a little bit about the art itself, like stuff on display now, the stuff that makes it, right? If you get into the Art Olympics, when you get there, how does the artwork itself begin to speak to any of this context, right? How does the art itself begin to address any of these concerns or critiques or discomforts or situations?
Well, that's a very complex question. I think that there are variant amounts of lenses that we can sort of like look into when it comes to that. So I think there is the commercial aspect of how art is viewed in Venice. You know, like you have not only just art lovers coming to see the work, example, it's not just about the tourist attraction, but also the people within commercial aspects who are coming to see the work. So sometimes the lens in which the art is looked at tends to be diluted, in terms of the impact of the work is. And I think it also comes in a form of hype, in regards to, this platform being this gigantic machine, that is revered around the world. The pressure that's being put on artists to perform and to make good work and to be revered as some sort of like superheroes. But at the same time, you realize that art doesn't really have the same impact of the machine going to AK-47. So, but my response to that is more based on like, how did you make the people feel? What impact have you made the people feel when they left your pavilion? It is okay to have conversations within peers, industry people within the arts, but for the common man, it's a little bit different. There's that aspect, and then there's also the aspect of like an artwork coming from Venice and then going back to maybe the country of origin of the artist. What type of impact would that be? It would be totally different from how it's viewed in Venice. And also I think that there's a huge blanket that artists have to sort of like unveil from with regards to the hype and celebrity status that comes with exhibiting Venice. So in certain regards, like for example, I really appreciated the Ukraine Pavilion. That's the first building I got to, and I got to, when I got to Venice, that's the first building I got to, and I could feel the energy with what is going on between Ukraine and Russia. I could feel the energy with the radical energy within the art or even the building itself, with what's going on between Ukraine and Russia. But in general, just to wrap up and answer what you said, I feel like the impact of art is usually from the observers, the people who consume the art. And sometimes the line gets a little bit blurry when it's people or industry people compared to the normal people.
I'm going to return to that question of the blurring of the line that you ended with, right? Between the context of things and the specific focus aspect of art making or art exhibiting. But I'm excited. Paul Nditi is with us. We were having connectivity issues. Paul, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Thank you. It was wonderful for you to have you here. Amr El Sally, if it's all right, would you please just briefly introduce yourself to us in any way that you feel comfortable introducing yourself?
Well, as you said, my name is Paul Onditi. I'm a visual artist, and to be very specific, a painter for that matter. Of course, I do installations, room installations, and a bit of sculpting out of hides and skins, but that's not a very common practice. The much of what people know of me is painting, so basically, I think that's who I am.
Uh-oh. Thank you so much. Can I ask you, thinking about the issue of Venice, are you still here? Did I?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. We're talking about the Biennale and some of the complications with such a global exhibition. I was just talking about it as the Art Olympics. And Ronald Muchatuta was just telling us about how the issues of the world begin to impact our experience of the art. I mean, for you, what was most striking about this event?
Well, for me, it's a rather interesting event, I would say. The first time I ever interacted with Venice was in 2017. And it was an interesting occasion because then we as a country, and by that I mean Kenya, we had to at some point wrestle with some private cartels who had infiltrated the system to, sell out what was ideally our pavilion. And I remember.
Sorry, Paul, to interrupt you, but I think you should tell that story because I think some people might not know that about what happened and how now the Kenyan Pavilion kind of you guys organized to actually take ownership of it.
Sorry, I didn't get that.
Sorry, Paul. I would like for you to talk about the cartel situation there about 6 years ago, how the Kenya Pavilion was hijacked and how you guys intervened to get it back. I think some of the students might not have backgrounds on it. So do you mind, instead of just passing through it, actually just take a minute to give us more details in terms of like how it came, what happened, and then you can jump in and let you go on after. Sorry to interrupt, but I think it's an important event.
Yeah, so basically, the whole situation was, someone privately did an application on behalf of the Kenyan government, and they were given a go-ahead to, put up a pavilion. Ideally, this gentleman is an Italian guy, and unknown to most of us, we just realized we had a pavilion. Sadly enough, it had 6 Chinese nationals in it, and just a single Kenyan, which was not very amusing. And so at some point, we had to confront the government and show up and have them retrieve from this kind of a thing. Eventually, we were happy to get it back. It was of course through some sort of violence, I would say. We had to go aggressive on the minister then. It wasn't a very good meeting for him. I remember us threatening to show up in Venice with cans of paint to cause some serious havoc, which actually got him to rethink his position. Thereafter, we were given a go-ahead through the cultural department to organize our own, which then became another daunting task because then we didn't have the financial allocation from the government. And so I and Jimmy Ogonga, who happened to be the curator then, fought for the space, which we had through a well-wisher. And this was in Judaica. We were given a space in a school. And so that's where I was going to. We were given a space in a school, a space that had not been accessed for like about 13 years. We had to start by cleaning all the rooms which were filled with doors and chairs and everything else. We were encountering all sorts of skeletons, dead bats and rats. Well, long story short, at the end of it, we did what we did, and there was a Kenyan pavilion for the first time in 2017. That was my first interaction with that space. So fast forward, we are happy to actually have taken one for the team because this time around, the government was able to sponsor fully a proper pavilion with proper artists from Kenya. And, we have a reason to celebrate with those who took part in that pavilion this year.
Definitely. And what was really great is actually you have as well the minister, Ambassador Amina Mohammed, who was there for the opening, which I think really speaks a lot about the work that you and Jimmy and other artists, how you guys have come together and actually as well champion the government for them to actually take this more seriously as well. And I think also like the idea of kind of, you know, the Italians, the Chinese, and the bigger kind of political play in terms of their presence in Kenya as well, right? In terms of like selling kind of our resources as a commodity, right? And then the government not really having any kind of background information or at the same time pride or understanding of how you're actually, it's the same way that we're, you know, in Kenya selling land to the highest bidder, right? And giving resources and selling it out. And I think you all as artists, as a collective, really coming in together and, you know, and now in 2020, having, you know, a space that was really kind of solidified and as well having the Minister of Tourism, Education and Culture, Ambassador Amina Mohammed, to be there is a huge step in how Kenya will be hopefully represented a bit more authentically. And then as well, what I really think about, and I think as well within Kenyan governments, for it to happen, you know, maybe it's a reflection as well of what's happening in the continent, and maybe thinking about like how civilians and people can take more serious in terms of ownership, and also the possibility for you to take more control and not having land grabbers and people with you know, coming in to kind of take your resources. And which is the same thing that happened with the Malawi Pavilion this year, where you had a tourism company as well went to Malawi and you know, went to the minister, you know, the Ministry of Tourism and Arts and Culture, and as well did the same thing. Had a German artist with, you know, these sculptures and photographies of like in a desert completely, and it was like the first time that Malawi would be represented. And how come that you have a non-Malawian artist pretty much there? And I think with us, with African Arts in Venice Forum, we had a gala on the first night, and what we did, and even behind the scenes before that, is that there was a huge petition, and the petition was pretty much all the artists that are Malawian artists that could have been featured and such, which is about 300 of them, signed the petition. And it was kind of a work of activism of being like, we have all these people, how come you have not thought about them? And that petition actually, way before the opening of the Biennale, the pavilion did not go on, and the German artist was not able to exhibit because he's not representing the artists of the country. So I think there is a lot of kind of cookery happening there behind the scenes, and kind of thinking about how that kind of reflects on the politics and representation of our nations in the continent.
So thank you for that. And it's interesting to hear, you know, some of the complications behind the scenes of like, how does something get seen in the context of this exhibition? We have about 10 more minutes. We've been talking, and I've been enjoying the conversation, but I wanted to point that out so that those of us in the audience who haven't said things, who would like to, can do so. I don't want to call anyone out, but I would love to hear more about folks coming from the MICA side. Like, what did you see that you loved? What did you see that provoked you? What did you see or learn about that you want to talk more about? Are there those kinds of things? So in addition,
speak again. I can speak again.
Leah has things to say. Please go ahead, Leah. Other folks, maybe you'll get other folks to join the conversation too.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I will say that I really enjoyed the French pavilion. I thought that was nice. And the British pavilion I thought was really cool. I haven't really been able to see a lot of the biennial, to be honest with you, because I had COVID and I had to be in my room for a whole week. So I lost the entire week. So I'm actually gonna try and catch up and go to the Arsenale today. Although I heard that New Zealand was really good, so I'm looking forward to seeing that pavilion as well. But I think in terms of what I thought was interesting, and I'll say that in a neutral way, was Kehinde Wiley's exhibit, which is, you know, not a part of the biennial, but it's just a, I guess like a, in a sense, a collateral event in the city. And I mean, I guess it was an exhibition that was kind of like, you know, predetermined. It was took a couple of years to make the exhibition and whatnot. And so essentially, you know, he usually had his really large paintings, but except for the hero stance that his figures would usually take, it would be more like a fallen hero type of situation. So kind of like almost like in-depth or near-depth poses of like fallen heroes, essentially. And what he did differently was that with the paintings and with the figures taking on these new poses within his works, those figures were also created as bronze cast statues. So when you're walking into the space, it's very low lighting in there, with very specific lighting on the paintings as well as the and I have to be honest that I felt the reproduction of the figures that were in the paintings being similar to the figures that were produced as statues felt redundant to me. And we actually already talked about this already when we visited the exhibition as a group. So everybody else knows my pretty much my perspective on this, but I just personally, I felt that I guess they have the same type of figures pose in the same type of ways in a painting, but also as a bronze cast statue, just felt very redundant and repetitive to me and didn't really add anything new to the exhibition to make it feel different. And so the only part of the exhibition that actually felt compelling to me was these two statues that were kind of like inside like a see-through casket, which I guess is similar to how, you know, saints are showcased in churches, of the bronze cast statues of a man and a woman, like, you know, in the wall, essentially. So my first reaction to it was I was a little freaked out by it because it just felt too real. But at the end, I think when I walked away and I walked back to it, for the man, I felt what I found really funny was that he was kind of like opening like a little bit of a middle finger as in like in his in-depth position, which I thought was pretty funny. But that'll be my take on the Kehinde Wiley exhibition.
Thank you for that. That's great. That's great. So, Sisipo, I'm coming back to you. As an artist and as a curator, you know, this time in Venice, what did you see that you mentioned artists, a list of artists when we first started talking, but was there something that kind of stood out for you and like you really, like it stays with you?
I think there were a lot of things that I saw that I think were amazing. But I think most of the things that sort of stayed with me were things that I didn't, but sort of like felt. I think that, sure, I think there is, I guess, a huge sort of like interdisciplinary aesthetic that's sort of like resurfacing at the moment in terms of like visual cultures and visual art. But I think the things that I really enjoyed a lot, because they also sort of like offered a break in terms of looking at things where you were just there and you were just feeling things. Definitely it was precious work, just because there was sound, there was, you know, the temperature was different. And it was sort of like just disrupted the sort of like flow of just walking and looking at things. And I think there was also like quite a lot of video works, weirdly enough, that I thought were incredible. I think also post COVID, there's been a lot of, at least more of a showing of video art than before COVID. I mean, video art has always been incredible, but I think it was never necessarily given as much, I guess, center stage as like paintings or sculptures. And I think I really enjoyed. I found myself spending a lot of time in like video rooms and watching the films. And what else? I mean, to be honest, there's so much. There's really so much. But I think, yeah, I'm mentioning these two things only because I don't think they were necessarily not necessarily celebrated, but given as much airtime, so to speak, as some of the other more prominent artists. And I think most of these artists will also sort of like change the way that, you know, even as a viewer, you experience the biennial. A lot of the artists who were given that center stage were artists who were sort of like practicing in a more traditional way, whether it's like either producing paintings, which again are still beautiful, or making like bronze sculptures. And I think it was beautiful to sort of like bump into works that were sort of not as traditional as the rest of the biennial. There were also quite a few. I mean, I went to an installation by Shiraz Beju, who's like a Mauritian UK artist who sort of like collaborated with Sia, who's a South African musician and artist, and also Michael, who is based in Paris. So Sia was sort of like singing. I don't know if singing is the right word, but he had like vocals coming out of his mouth. He was making sounds, which are also lyrical. And then Michael, who I think is a dancer or works with body movement and choreography, but from a point of not necessarily seeing well. So it was interesting to sort of like play those things together in terms of like, you know, like you say, like the Art Olympics, but what does the Art Olympics mean when, you know, can you experience art without necessarily looking at it? And how does that experience plan out? So I think the things that really stuck with me were things that sort of questioned or sort of moved beyond the aesthetics, but, you know, sort of brought things back to the sort of basics in terms of like experience, but also stretching how we experience things that are outside of our body. Yeah.
Beautiful. Paul and Diti, can I return to you and ask this question? You know, what for you was really striking or provoking that you'd like to share?
Yeah. For me, basically, what actually stood out was one show that was put up by Anselm Kiefer. I think I'm pretty much biased on this, being a painter. I'm more or less that kind of a person who narrows down the search area and deals with things that I think more or less interest me a lot. And Anselm did put up quite a beautiful show, I must say. The size of it, the presence, you know, you walk into this room and all of a sudden all these walls are filled up. It's quite a challenging moment when you see this kind of a thing go up the walls, because then being a painter, having practiced over the years, I quite understand what it takes to do probably an A3 size of a painting. But then here is a gentleman who's gone out of his way to actually show the world that, you know, it must not just fit the wall. It must not just be a thing or a dot on the wall, but you can actually fill up the whole space. It's a world between installation and painting together. And the wonder around his work for me was how he's able to, you know, bring a reality of a life-size presence without really struggling. You know, elements come together and make a lot of sense. Quite random elements, quite random tones of color, which are actually not different as much. It's almost a monotone, but making so much sense that he did not have to introduce blue, red, green, and everything in there to make so much sense. So really for me, I did not do so much in the rounds other than the main pavilions. But that one really stood out for me, and it was a life-changing moment just to experience.
That's fantastic. I saw someone's video popped on when you talked about painting, and I'm wondering if that person whose video popped on wants to say things, or if they just put their video on. Hi, Tyler. You know, I'm going to ask you what your thoughts are. We always want to hear your thoughts.
About the entire topic, or just what was said a few moments ago?
Well, just tell us what you saw that you want to share.
In Venice, I will say that I have come more or less with a view of like judgment as an individual, in the sense of looking at the awards that different artists have received and then saying, if I was in charge of this, would I have said, oh, this is good, this is good? So really assessing the people who are actually in these positions of power in order to give out golden lions, or to write reviews in really prestigious papers, magazines, etc. So I don't know, really just trying to put my own self as an everyday person into those roles. Well, that's just like a self thing that I've done in my mind.
I love that, because, you know, if I'm walking around, that's the sense I have as well. Like, who gets to make these cool decisions? And then I know people like Sisipo, who is one of those people who makes these decisions. Sisipo, can you say something about your role as a curator now and how powerful you can be?
I think because I work for a commercial gallery in South Africa, now we have a space in Amsterdam, but I think we are known as a South African gallery. I think we sort of like occupy an interesting position because we participate in, like, you know, some of the most prestigious fairs like Art Basel in Basel, Switzerland, or Miami. So that already sort of like situates us on a different kind of scale in terms of like the global art market and the institutions that we have access to put our artists' work in the collections and stuff like that. But at the same time, we're also a gallery in Africa. So, just before this meeting, I was reading an email from like a lot of creators in America, but also in Europe, who basically just email and say, hey, I'm creating a show on African art. Can you suggest artists that could fit into this concept of African art? And I'm just like, if I get one more of these emails, I'm seriously gonna smash my laptop. But I think it's just, you know, so one, on the other hand, yes, there's the access that we have. And on the other hand, there's also our geography, which sort of like never fully gives us access to our access, right? So, and I can say that, yes, we've got, sure, because of the scale of our gallery, we are able to invite, you know, artists who are based, you know, wherever. But at the same time, there's still that level of, you know, a lot of people, major artists or like prestigious artists or, you know, older artists, mature artists don't necessarily give us that level of respect because we are this gallery in Africa. So even for our group exhibitions, we always have to like write an extended letter, dear artist, this is who I am, especially as myself, as a young, you know, I guess curator, creative person. I always have to justify my position and justify my audacity to ask for this like famous artist, African-American, Black, European, African diaspora artists to show their work in South Africa, right? And of course, South Africa has its own politics in relation to the rest of the continent, but at the same time, we are still, you know, a gallery in Africa. So that was also one of the reasons why we expanded to Amsterdam. Because of lockdown, we weren't participating in this space, so we weren't necessarily getting as many clients as we wish to get to sustain our program. And that was obviously a cheaper option than, you know, going to Art Basel, which will cost like R1 million, sure, for like, you know, some of the major American, European galleries. That's relatively affordable. But if you're paying in rands, that's, you know, a whole different, it's a whole different game ball. So I think that, yes, we sort of make decisions maybe within a local context, but I think within a global context, I think there's a lot of undermining. I think I definitely believe in our program. Sure, it can definitely improve. It can be more accessible. It can be more experimental. But I think that, you know, part of those, like for us, how we do it is that some of the artists who maybe like work with installation and don't sell as much, those production costs will be paid for by the artists who, you know, get the gallery a lot of money. So it sort of like balances itself out in the sense that, yes, we'll have artists who sell a lot so that we can actually sustain the artists who don't sell as much. And I think most of our artists understand, you know, and also not all of the artists who are going to be famous throughout their careers. Some of the ones who are more famous now were the ones who were sustained by the ones who were famous 5 or 10 years ago. So the cycle changes all the time. But I think for myself, I think, you know, people in like the global South, or people work within like a global South context. So you might not even be like within the global South in physical geography, but I think that we are so far ahead in terms of, you know, the rigor of, you know, the philosophies, the context, the conversations, but there's a limitation within which how we can push that rigor within the international art, you know, community, international visual art community. So, and I think maybe I'm saying all this to sort of like disrupt the idea of, you know, making decisions. I think, yes, definitely we make decisions. I'm not going to downplay that. But I think it's always within a particular kind of bar. You know, there's like a glass ceiling, which I think, you know, as a gallery or a curator in Africa, based in Africa, it's different. Whereas also if you might be a Black female curator based, you know, in New York or wherever, there's a different level of access. But also it means that you're not necessarily your interest, but, you know, like I think the conversations that we talk about are within the context within which we exist from. I don't think that anyone with like mega access to anything can have a rigorous conversation, because it's always within that bar. And I think people who operate from like maybe from a lesser position can push the conversation further, because they're not necessarily, they don't have to abide by the rules of that level of access. So I think it's a balance thing, Rael. Yeah.
well, it's important. I feel it's important to keep that in mind, because I know as I walk around a place like you know, the Biennale, I think, oh wow, it is overwhelming. Mm-hmm. And so it feels like, wow, whoever is making that decision is a big, important person. And yes, these decisions are made by big, important people, but they operate in an environment and in concert with others. And so I'm mindful of our time. We only have a few more minutes, but I want to make sure that I go back to Ronald Muchatuta. And Ronald, I can't see you yet, but I know you're there.
Can I say one more thing? Sorry, I know about time. But I think maybe my point was that I think we should always question whoever is appointed within a position of power. I think most of the people who are appointed are usually people who come from like a very radical background. But I think the appointment comes with certain things, and I think we should always question that relationship. Yeah.
No, that's lovely, and thank you for saying it. It's much more clear than how it was in my head, right? So there is a dynamic, there is a relationship between a decision and the decision maker and the environment in which it happens. Ronald? Uh-oh.
Yes, Rael.
Oh, you're here.
Yeah, I'm here.
I knew you were here, and I know you have things to say in terms of the power dynamics. So I wanted to offer opportunity for you to say something about, you know, the power dynamics and being included or not. What are you making?
Can you repeat that? Power dynamics between who?
No, the power dynamics of an artist being included in a major exhibition or not being included or wanting to be included.
So I feel like, you know, there was something that we didn't highlight in this discussion, but I felt that I was a bit reluctant, but I think Sisipo touched on it, but not in depth. She touched on it from a perspective of the gallery system and the artist and how Africa is perceived and stuff like that. And I think for me, I had an incident, you know, and I think Sisipo knows about this. We had an incident in Venice where we encountered like bad treatment, you know, by a celebrity, you know, and his entourage. And it was just it was a very wild situation. We were not really expecting it, you know, and it kind of like, it's reinforced the issue of like how do our African American brothers and sisters see us as Africans in Europe, you know, so the way we handled it was we handled it in an amicable way, but then we were in a position of also questioning like how should one react in the future if this is the kind of treatment we get. So I wanted to add on to what Sisipo had mentioned, but you know, going back to your question, I feel like as an artist just stays true to their craft and to their voice, irregardless of what the platform is. You know, I always believed that as an artist, you move forward because of the voice behind your work. And even when people are not seeing, even not when you think people are not noticing what's happening with your voice, with your work, I mean, or not taking note, there are people who really are, but they feel like the time isn't right yet. And when the time is right, it's like, you know, all things align for the greater good. But for me, I always felt that in whichever situation one puts themselves into, you should always put your best foot forward and never regret in the future for not taking that best foot. So I think like with regards to Venice and these huge platforms and stuff like that, I think that one should refrain from being a little bit big-headed as an artist, but humble themselves in a way in which they honor their craft more than what they think the hype could provide for them. And I think that's not for everybody, but that's how I see it.
Thank you so much for that. It's actually a lovely way for us to come to our time. I want to say thank you, big, huge thank yous to the African Art in Venice Forum, Paula and Diti for being with us, Sisipo, thank you for being here. Every time I am about to say Sisipo's surname, I pause and I smile and I say, no, I'm not going to do that. Because I've heard the actual, Please say it for us, please.
It's Sisi Ngodwana.
This is a challenge for my American tongue. I'm working on it. It's been some years. I'm working on it. And for all of you who are here, thank you for joining us. Jenny Hirsch and Kerr Houston, wonderful to do it. And please enjoy the rest of your time in Italy, and we'll continue the conversation. Just as a reminder, we've asked, the African Art in Venice Forum has asked for everyone to send us images. So if we could please do that, just a few images, and just to see through your point of view what matters to look at. So again, thanks very much. Enjoy the rest of your day further.
Thank you, Rael.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Ciao.
Ciao. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Really
Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
And the most complicated part of